Okay, kia ora koutou e te whānau, nā mihi nui kia koutou. Ko Matt Highway ahau, he kaimahi ahau mātua kai whakahaere, New Zealand Association of Resource Management, or NZARM. Nō reira tēnā koutou katoa. Good afternoon, everyone. Look, thank you very much for joining us on this webinar, well-anticipated freshwater farm planning, and a big welcome to our guests from Ministry for the Environment, Michael Edmondson and Pippa Auld. So my name is Matt Highway. I act as the CEO for NZARM and a director of environmental consultancy. I'd just like to start the day with a karakia in normal NZARM fashion, if that's okay. E te hui, pai a te mataranga kia marama. He whai take nā mahi katoa. Tū maia, tū kaha. Aroha atu, aroha mai, tātou I a tātou katoa. For this gathering, seek knowledge for understanding, have purpose in all that you do, stand tall, be strong, let us show respect for each other. Awesome, cool. So yeah, thanks again for coming along. We have an hour today, which we'll probably need, I think, and we have approximately sort of 40 or 45 minutes of presentation from Michael and Pippa, and some time, 20 minutes to ask questions at the end. Please ask questions throughout. So if you wiggle your mouse like I have to and just go down to the Q&A button, it's on the very bottom bar. That's where you can enter your questions. You can also upvote questions as well. So you don't always have to enter your own question. You could see something in there that you like and hit the like button and it'll upvote it the more that are on there. So yeah, please sort of engage with that throughout. We'll do questions at the end just in case we're covering things through the presentation. Also, the session will be recorded, will be emailed back out to you and also put through the NZARM website. So the NZARM website will have this talk recorded, hopefully some slides as well, if that's okay with our MFE friends, and a bunch of questions as well. So if we don't get to all the questions, and some of them might be sort of more technical things that we might have to go away and feedback, once we've got through those questions, they'll be posted online as well. So your questions, if we don't cover them today, they'll still be covered and answered in due course. Yeah, so yeah, it is my pleasure to introduce again Michael and Pippa from MFE, and I'll let them introduce themselves properly. Needless to say, they've been working very, very hard over the last few months, probably years maybe, on this freshwater farm planning stuff. And we really appreciate you coming along today. So the last thing I would say before I hand over is thank you very much. Thank you for giving up your time today, being open to the sort of range of questions from the guests, and also for the hard work that you've been doing behind the scenes. So thank you. Over to you, Michael and Pippa.
Oh, kia ora. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Michael Edmondson. I'm one of the principals in the Freshwater Farm Plan team at Ministry for Environment. So today we're just going to talk about freshwater farm plans, what they are, where they come from, and hopefully what we're going to achieve. So last Thursday, the regulations were finally released with the first region, Southland and Waikato, commencing on the 1st of August. So today we're just going to give a little bit of an overview for you. There's a lot to talk about in 45 minutes. So we're just going to give it a brief overview about the policy processes and the outcomes, the timelines for implementation, what we've done in terms of guidance and resources available for farmers, growers, developers, certifiers, industry, the freshwater farm plan system, how it works, and then at the end, as Matt said, we'll have questions. So just want to reiterate that we probably won't be able to answer all of your guys' questions today, because we don't want to answer something that's not, we need to make sure our answers are 100% correct to be able to make sure that we're putting everyone in the right direction. So I'll pass on to Pippa to introduce herself, and she's going to be giving the first part of the presentation.
Kia ora. Yeah, as Mike said, I'm Pippa and also part of the Freshwater Farm Plans team at MFE. So I'm a senior analyst and I've been with the team just on a year now. So have seen quite a lot of this process unfold. And as Mike said, we're very pleased to have the regulations gazetted last week. So hopefully we can shed a little bit more light on things for you today. So part of what we were asked to talk to today was kind of successes and limitations of the policy. And I think Mike and I went away and we kind of talked about it. And we think it's a little bit early to offer successes and limitations because the policy is really yet to be switched on anywhere. So instead, what I'm going to talk to a little bit is kind of the process that we've taken to develop the regulations and kind of our hopes for the outcomes of the policy and some of the challenges that we foresee might come up as the Freshwater Farm Plan system is rolled out. So I'll just do a really high level overview of essential freshwater and kind of where freshwater farm plans sit as part of that. So I'm sure everyone on this webinar is well aware of essential freshwater and its key aims, which are that stop further degradation, show material improvement, and reverse past damage to restore our waterways to a healthy state. So freshwater farm plans are designed to be a key delivery tool that kind of sit under the essential freshwater umbrella, and that they will work in combination with the MPS, the NES, and the stock exclusion regulations, and also that they will kind of produce practical outcomes working towards those essential freshwater aims, so particularly that reversing past damage and returning our waterways to health. So I'll talk a little bit to the process that we took in developing the regulations. As many of you will be aware, we've taken a slightly less traditional approach to drafting the regulations. So alongside kind of all the traditional policy work that goes on in the background, we've been doing a lot of system design work and user testing, and kind of developing the resources that will support the system, kind of all in concert, with the intention that all of the feedback and testing and information that we gathered throughout the process feeds back up into those final regulations, as I'm sure some of you have done some very exciting weekend reading. And yeah, those of you who haven't probably will at some point. So we consulted on options for the regulations way back in July 2021. So that was well before Michael or I joined in the Freshwater Farm Plan team. And the drafting of the regulations was commenced in August last year. So even prior to starting drafting the regulations, our team were out on the ground doing initial system design and testing that on farms. So we visited over 70 farms between May and August last year with our sort of first generation version of the Freshwater Farm Plan system. And based on the feedback that we gathered through that process, we then ran into the pilot process. So the pilots were run in partnership with regional councils. So that was Southland, Waikato, Gisborne and Gisborne. And that pilot process was about testing the system, not just the freshwater farm plans themselves, but kind of end to end with the regional council role and the certification process as well. So as part of those pilots, that was, we visited 25 farms, and again, we gathered feedback from the farmers that were visited and also from the regional councils that were involved in that process. And all of that information, again, was fed back into the drafting process. So we tested our exposure draft of the regulations in January, early this year, 2023. And that was tested with a group of about 50 key stakeholders. And around that same time, we also tested with some of the regional council sector stakeholders our initial drafts of guidance to support those regulations. And again, that feedback was all fed back up into the final drafting process and has resulted in the regulations and guidance as you see them today. So the intent of working through this process was really to build a system that these are regulated freshwater farm plans, but we want them to be flexible as kind of your more traditional farm plans that people might be familiar with are. So we want them to be workable for the wide variety of farming systems, of landscapes, and also of catchments that we have across the country. And we also really wanted to ensure that they were workable for farmers, and that kind of they could find a way to use this risk and outcome-based approach that we have focused on their own farm. So I'll move on to the next slide. Alrighty. So policy outcomes. So we think that the process that we have undertaken has kind of led us to this set of regulations that is designed to, as I said, allow flexibility. So as part of that freshwater farm planning process, farmers will need to consider their local catchment that their farm sits in, the landscape and biophysical features of their farm and their own farming system. So they can tailor their plan to be fit for purpose based on those factors. So it's not one size fits all, and it can be adapted across industries and the wide variety of environments that we have in New Zealand. We've designed a system that centres the health of the why, of the water, and on-farm decision making. So the intent here has been using a risk-based approach that asks the farmer to really consider those three factors that I've just talked to above there, that catchment, the landscape and biophysical features of the farm, and the farming system itself, to identify where the risks to freshwater are happening on their farm, and to really do that first and then select the appropriate actions that they can undertake to manage those and to get better outcomes for the health of the water. And that leads into that considering impacts beyond the farm gate. So part of freshwater farm plans is going to be the need to have regard to catchment context information, which will be provided by regional councils. And the focus there is that farmers really consider their impacts on freshwater quality in the catchment, cultural significance, cultural values that exist within that catchment, and also community significance, recreational sites, and the impact that their farming activities might have on those. And we've also worked to build in this promotion of continuous improvement. So freshwater farm plans need to be certified and audited. So the certification process is about ensuring that the identified risks and the actions to manage those risks to freshwater are fit for purpose. And by having cycles of recertification, that they remain fit for purpose over time. And the audit process there is there to ensure that actions are being implemented as they have been set out in that certified freshwater farm plan. So hopefully that gives a bit of background as to our kind of policy outcomes that we've tried very hard to build into these regulations. I think in terms of challenges, due to the sort of this intention of building in flexibility to the system, we do think that it will take time to bed in. You may have noticed that we don't have a template available for developing a freshwater farm plan as an MFE product. So this was intentional at this stage to allow for innovation and for industry and for the sector itself to kind of step in and interpret the freshwater farm planning process and the requirements as best suited to their industry or their stakeholders. The CCCV or the catchment context challenges and values information that will be defined and developed by regional councils to feed into the freshwater farm plans, that will also develop over time, for example, as the new regional plans come online. So we do envisage that it will take some time for all of the pieces of the puzzle to come together. But I think that is part of the freshwater farm plan system. It's not a box ticking exercise. We don't want to just give everyone a template and be like, go away and fill this out, tick your box and put it in the drawer and never think about it. We are encouraging the industry to have some behaviour change around how they identify and assess risks to fresh water and how they manage that on farm. So possibly we will have challenges that arise due to kind of all of the pieces of the puzzle that have to come together to really get the freshwater farm plans system operating at its full potential. So I can just quickly talk a little bit about timelines. So as you'll know, our regulations are now gazetted. Phase 1 regions will switch on as of August 1. So that is Southland and Waikato. Phase 2, we are looking at early 2024. And the intention is that everyone, all of New Zealand, will be switched on by the end of 2025. It is important to note, though, that that doesn't mean that by the 31st of December 2025, every farmer in New Zealand will have a certified freshwater farm plan. Farmers have 18 months from the day that their region or area switches on to engage a certifier to certify their plan. So these will be happening over time, not all at once by the end of 2025. We are also developing our key system infrastructure. So a part of that is the certifier and auditor appointment process. And that is ongoing and will be developed over time. Same with the integrated national farm data platform. So that is the platform that certifiers and auditors will use to feed their information about certifying and auditing back to regional councils. And that will be available for the phase 1 councils in a bridging form, and development of the final platform will be happening through the second half of this year. So guidance and resources. Some of you, I imagine, have seen already. MFE has got technical policy guidance for the freshwater farm plan system available already. So we have a system overview and developing a freshwater farm plan. So those documents are more geared towards farmers or those who will be developing freshwater farm plans to understand how the system works, what is involved in getting a certified and audited freshwater farm plan, and what timeframes you need to do things by. The developing a freshwater farm plan goes through the process of how you actually develop a plan that will meet the requirements for certification. We've got a couple of pieces of guidance there available for regional councils. So that's the catchment context guidance and tangata whenua in the freshwater farm plan system. We've got certification audit guidance that will be released very soon, and also guidance for tangata whenua to understand their role in the system. We're also working in partnership with Regional Sector New Zealand to develop some further support products and guidance. So at this stage, we're currently working on a series of example freshwater farm plans, and they will be done based on industry, and we are looking to have industry body input on these. So we're looking to set up a technical working group as we develop those products. They will be available August 1 for when the system is switched on in those first regions. So those will really be about illustrating to farmers and plan developers what a freshwater farm plan can look like. It won't be the only way of doing a freshwater farm plan to meet certification requirements, but it will be to support that understanding of what the final product can be. And Mike is also currently doing a lot of work with industry assurance programs to help them to understand what would need to be done to update or adapt their plans to meet freshwater farm plan requirements. All right, Mike, I think that is my portion done. So Mike is now going to talk in more specific terms about the freshwater farm plan system as a whole, how it kind of works end to end, and then he'll go into a bit more detail on what is included in a freshwater farm plan as well.
Cool, thanks, Pippa. So to start with, let's give an overview of the freshwater farm plan system. So the original legislation for the freshwater farm plans is Part 9A. So I guess that's a bit of a broad overview, and that's the why, the purpose of the freshwater farm plans, the what's, what is required within a freshwater farm plan. A lot of the definitions, such as different farm types, area thresholds, which I'll cover off shortly, and who is responsible for the freshwater farm plan. So the farm operator, that's the definition of a farm operator under the RMA is the person that has ultimate responsibility for the freshwater farm plan implementation. And the regulations, I suppose, are taking that what, why, who, and making that into the how. How do you put all these things together? It's got a bit of a what in there as well, but it's how do you put all of these together to get the freshwater farm plan outcomes you're after. So the catchment context, challenges and values, so that's something new that is not in many current farm environmental plans around the country. So Pippa's already talked about how the CCCV, that's formed by your local regional council in consultation with tangata whenua, and that looks at things such as it could be priority contaminants, areas of cultural significance, freshwater sites, special indigenous animals, those sort of things that are high value within the catchment where your farm is. So a freshwater farm plan is one required for your property. So under the Part 9 of the RMA, so the thresholds are for an arable property, it's 20 hectares or over. For a pastoral farm, it's 20 hectares or over. For a viticulture operation, it's 5 hectares or over. And developing your freshwater farm plan. So Pippa just mentioned this briefly. Currently, industry programs would, I reckon, have between just roughly 10 to 13,000 FEPs throughout the country, or farm environmental plans already in process. And these freshwater farm plans, we don't want farmers to go out and have a secondary plan. We don't want farmers to have one plan for their company and then another freshwater farm plan. So we've been working closely with industry to help them align their freshwater farm, or their current FEPs, the industry programs, with the freshwater farm plan requirements. So when the regulations are turned on within the region where your farm is, that your industry company could help you align your FEP and you've got a freshwater farm plan. It's just a bit of a change of mindset for some of these current farm environmental plans, from being predominantly, a lot of them are good management practice, and moving towards the risk-based approach that Pippa has talked about. So having a bespoke farm plan for your particular environment that you're in. So developing your farm plan, that can be done by the farmer, can be done by your industry bodies in consultation with the farm. You could get a consultant in to do it. You can develop a freshwater farm plan however you like. And as Pippa said, there's no one set template, not one specific process. As long as you meet those final outcomes of what the freshwater farm plan is requiring, which I'll go on to in a later slide, then it should be satisfactory. Okay, so once you've completed your freshwater farm plan, you've got to engage a certifier. I think the words in the regulations actually do use the word engage certifier. So that basically means that, as Pippa said, and we're going to use Southland and Waikato. Their first, was it Waipa and Waikato and Upper Ema and Southland, the first two of the first catchments to get turned on. So they've got 18 months from the 1st of August to engage a certifier to get that freshwater farm plan signed off and information submitted to council. Now I am racing through this a little bit because, as I said, there's going to be more information on the next slides about this process in a bit more detail. So freshwater farm plan certification, it basically, does it meet the freshwater farm plan minimum requirements, and they're set out in the regulations. And part of that, when the farm plan has been signed off, the certifier has to submit a certain amount of information to the council, and that's not your full freshwater farm plan. That's things like your administrative details, a farm, they call it a spatial extent, so a farm map of the areas covered off within your freshwater farm plan, the actions within that freshwater farm plan. So what are your actions? And each of those actions are categorized. So you've got 3 different categories of actions, and this comes into a bit of importance with your audit, which we'll talk about. So the first, we've got A is catchment context actions. So those are the priority actions within your catchment that you're in, and how is your farm impacting those well, how can you mitigate those risks to the environment from your farm? Second one is regulatory action. So if it's a regulatory action, say a rule or a consent condition, you have to do it. And the third one is called supplementary action. So that could be, those are actions, it could be something like GMP action. Okay, so you've got to submit those and timeframes for completion of those actions as well. And for your audit certification, you've got up to a 5-year window to implement those actions, but it does come down to a risk-based approach. So if you've got high risk areas on your farm, that you probably want to put them to the top of the priority list for completing. And as I said, regulated actions, they have to be done within those regulated timeframes. So once you've had your certification completed, you've got 1 year to get that audit done. So there's nothing to say that you might be in an industry assurance program that has a certification 1 week, and you might get audited and signed off and go into that program whatever the next week. So it's up to 1 year after that. And from that, the auditor will submit a grade to your council, and that's an A, B, C, or D grade. So A grade's everything's on track. B grade is everything's on track. All your regulated actions have been signed off, but you may be missing a couple of little things around your catchment context or supplementary actions. C grade, you've got a few minor issues, but a D grade or C grades, you've got it. Yeah, it's possibly a fail, but a D grade is that you've got some actions on your farm, regulated actions which haven't been implemented in within the regulated time frame, and that also impacts the length of time between your next audit. So if you get an A grade, it's 3 years to your next audit. A B grade is 2 years. A C grade is 1 year, and a D grade you have to be re-audited within 6 months. So we've got this little squiggly line around the side around system stewardship. And that's covered off in the last slide around the appointment process, and that's assure quality or overseeing all that. So Pippa will talk about that briefly on the last slide about certification, auditing, and how assure quality. So assure quality have been appointed by MFE to stand up this whole certification and appointment process. So we'll talk about that on the last slide. Do you want to move on to the next slide, please, Pippa? Cool. So this is basically how to develop a freshwater farm plan. Just trying to keep it as simple as possible. So identifying your risks on farm. So every freshwater farm plan has to be broken down into a number of land units. And what we've tried to do is make this as simple as possible. If you've already got a freshwater farm, or if you've got an FEP and it's got X amount of land units, you don't have to change that. But the more land units you have, for every land unit you have, you've got to submit information to the council and be audited and certified on every action for every single land unit. So the more actions you have, the more land units you have, the more actions that you're going to have to get signed off at certification and audit. So what we've tried to do is try and make the land unit development as simple as possible, and that's taken into account aspects such as your land, the topography, the slope of the land, the could be weather, could be rainfall, could be your soil profiles, and just what are those, basically those inherent natural physical features on your farm to help you develop that land unit. Once you've developed your land unit, so you might break your farm into X amount of land units, you've got to define what are the risks, the natural risks, which I just mentioned. What are the natural risks of that land unit for freshwater on your property? So it could be the weather, could be sediment runoff, could be leaching to groundwater. And then we've got overlay on top of that your management, your farming activities. So what are your activities that you're carrying out on farm that are basically having risks to freshwater? So it could be nutrient application, it could be effluent application, it could be grazing practices on slopes, things like that. And then you bring in your third one, which is that catchment context. And what are those values within that catchment? So your catchment, you might have a catchment with high phosphorus risk areas within that particular catchment. Your catchment might have, your farm might have some steep areas, high runoff risks on that. So that could be one of your inherent, or one of your catchment risks that you've got to consider for your property. And so basically overlaying those three different things together to develop your risk profile for your property. Once you've developed your risk profile for your property, you have a look at your existing actions to manage those risks on farm. And are those actions going far enough to mitigate those risks? Some current farm environmental plans, that GMP is that limit you're moving to. With freshwater farm plans, or GMP is good management practice, or GFP, good farming principles, you've got a lot of others, but freshwater farm plans, if your action through your current action is not effectively mitigating those risks, the freshwater farm plan can require you to go above and beyond what those current actions are. So you might be meeting a good management practice action, but that doesn't mitigate your risk to sediment runoff. So you might have to go above and beyond that GMP action to mitigate that risk effectively. And identifying those new risks to manage those actions. And then, as I said, for every risk you have on farm, you've got to have an action, and those actions are either existing actions, I'm doing it, or it's a completed action, or it's a new action which I'm going to implement, and that's where these timeframes come into it. So we've talked quickly about the categorization type. So you've got your regulated, your catchment, or your supplementary actions. And those are important to put in there, as I mentioned, for your certification and auditing purposes. And the action plan is up to a 5-year period. Right, do you want to go on to the next slide, Pippa, or should I talk a little bit about, oh no, go on to, have I missed anything on that slide, Pippa, that you want to mention? Or can we go on to the next one?
Maybe just talk to timeframes quickly, and then we'll jump to the next bit.
Timeframes. So in terms of
just that all
18
actions,
months.
No,
oh, sorry. Yeah,
smart. Have to have a time frame.
Yes. Sorry. Yep. Sorry.
So, but yeah, timeframes.
Yeah. Every action does have to have an implementation timeframe, and as I mentioned on the previous slide, that's a risk-based thing. So, well, if it's regulated, you've got to be completed within that regulated timeframe. But if it's a high risk action on your farm, high environmental risk, then basically what you're going to do, you're going to try and shorten that time frame up to implement those mitigations to manage that risk. But in saying that, actions do have to be fair and reasonable for the farmer as well. And I'm not going to go into too much detail right now about what fair and reasonable is, because that could put us down some rabbit holes. Right, so the certification assessment, that's a pretty straightforward. So certification is the freshwater farm plan fit for purpose? So the initial certification has to be, the legislation states that the initial certification has to be on farm. Secondary certifications don't have to be on farm. Okay, so does that freshwater farm plan meet those certification requirements? Are all those actions that we've got on that plan, are all the risks identified on that farm, are all those actions in place suitable for managing those risks? Okay, it's similar to what a lot of current farm environmental plan audits are at the moment. And the certification requirements are from, mentioned earlier, 18 months from the time that regulations commence with an catchment, you've got to engage a certifier. There are other aspects to that, like triggering a partial recertification within your freshwater farm plan. So that could be something like if you've got I don't know, let's just say a 50 hectare block, and you bring in another 30 hectares of land, and that's got a new inherent risk which isn't on your current block. So it could be you've got some lighter soils, or no, say you got some 50 hectares flat land, but you buy 30 hectares of steep hill country. So it's got new inherent vulnerabilities. It could be runoff risks, could be erosion risks. So you might have to get partial recertification done on that particular new block of land. Also, if it's got a different catchment context challenge, CCCV, that will have to have a partial recertification as well. If a farmer moves onto the property, or sorry, a new farm operator takes over that property and they don't want to complete that or continue with the current freshwater farm plan, then you've got 12 months to get a new plan recertified. And there was one other aspect which I can't quite remember, but it's covered off in the regulations. So if you do get a partial recertification, that doesn't impact on your 5-year full recertification. So you could have a freshwater farm plan that you got certified 4 years ago. You get a partial recertification done at 4 years because you've got this little extra block of land, but you've still got to get a full recertification done within 5 years of the last certification. So that doesn't reset your time frame to 5 years. Cool. Do you want to go to the next slide there, Pippa? Please.
Did it come up?
Audit, yeah, it did, sorry. Yeah, so the audit of the freshwater farm plan, and that is pretty black and white. It is, have the actions been implemented and completed within the set timeframes, and do they have adequate evidence to show that they have implemented and completed those actions set out in the plan. So 12 months from the plan being certified, you have to have an audit completed. And as I said, there's nothing stopping you from having your plan certified 1 week, having it audited the next week, or you could have it certified and audited up to 1 year later. Timeframes for following audits will be determined by the audit grade, and that is covered right at the very back of the freshwater farm plan regulations. So the grading's from A through to D, and 3 years right down to 6 months, and that's depending on what grade you get. And as I said, if you've got regulated actions with set timeframes and they're not completed, that looks like what these regulations say is an instant D grade. So you'll have to have another freshwater farm plan audit within 6 months. And the audit grade, oh, I've already covered that one off. Yeah, so there's not a lot of scope for the auditors. It's pretty black and white. Are you doing your actions or are you not doing your actions? So it's a pretty black and white process. It's quite similar to the ISO auditing. Do you want to go on to the next slide, which might be back to you, Pippa, I believe?
Yeah, I think, Mike, I might just quickly jump back to the certification slide, and it's not really represented on that slide, but just quickly to note that there is a second certification process that is available, or a review process. So if the farmer goes through the certification process with their initial certifier, they'll, at first port of call, if they have a disagreement with their certifier's assessment, they'll be able to provide written comment to the certifier, and the certifier then has to consider those comments and incorporate that into the final certification decision and the report that goes alongside that. And if the farmer at that stage is still not in agreement with the certifier's assessment and their decision about certification, they can seek a second certification. So that means that they can find another certifier who will go through that certification process again. And the decision of that second certifier will be the final decision. So there is sort of that opportunity to have a bit of a review of that process if they're not happy with the initial outcome.
My apologies for missing that one.
No, well, I didn't put it on the slide. So, All right, so I can talk now just fairly high level about the appointment process for certifiers and auditors. So Freshwater Farm Plan certifiers and auditors will be appointed to regional councils. So if you wish to become a certifier or an auditor and you wish to operate in more than one region, you will need to be appointed to each of the regional councils in which you wish to operate. Assure Quality is our third-party appointment process manager. So they will be supporting regional councils to run the appointment process. So certifiers and auditors will be applying to become certifiers and auditors through Assure Quality. They will then go through that appointment process and which involves kind of an initial application to demonstrate that you hold the relevant competencies which is set out in the regulations. And then there is a training and practical assessment process that you will need to go through. So Assure Quality will run that, supported by regional councils in the areas that the training is specific to that regional council. So, for example, in catchment context challenges and values training. And Assure Quality, once a prospective certifier or auditor has gone through that appointment process, Assure Quality will make a recommendation to regional council to appoint that person as a certifier and auditor. That will then be added to the list of certifiers and auditors that will be held and published by the regional council. So farmers will look to most likely their regional council website to find that list of available certifiers and auditors for their region. I think it's probably also just worth emphasising at this point, for both the certification and audit process, farmers are required to engage the certifier and auditor themselves. So, for example, an auditor is not just going to ring you up and say, hey, you're due to have your plan audited, or a certifier is not going to come knocking on your door and say, you know, you're coming up to your 5 years. That is the job of the farmer, and they will engage the certifier or auditor themselves. So certifiers and auditors will be added to a national register, but as I said, they will only be able to operate in regions which they are appointed to. So you can see a little bit more detail on that process in the diagram here, and the initial competencies that a certifier has to demonstrate and an auditor has to demonstrate to go through that training and assessment process. So there will be national level training that all certifiers and auditors will complete, and that will be the same for everyone. There will then be the regional training, which will be region specific for catchment context, and practical assessments will also be region specific. Tangata Whenua will be partners with regional councils for the development of the CCCV training. So they will feed into that process there. I think, Mike, was there anything else that you wanted to add on that? And other than that, we might just about be ready to hand over to the question portion.
No, but with that section 31, I think it is, of the regulations, we have had some questions coming in about that choosing and paying for an auditor. So if you're a part of an industry body or something like that, it could be down to your contractual arrangement that if you're part of a best practice program, that the program that you're part of will engage those auditors on your behalf. We've had a few questions come through on that.
Great, thank you, Michael and Pippa. Really appreciate the. You did mention at the start of this between us that you might get more questions than answers, and there's 53 questions sort of and counting. So yeah, you picked that one well. We've got 15 minutes, so we obviously won't get through all of those questions, just a few. What I intend to do, if it's okay with you guys, and if Michael and Pippa, if you're okay to just scan through as well, some of them you might want to answer in written form rather than picking them off today. So just to reiterate, we'll answer all of these. Thank you guys from MFE. Answer all of these and put them on the NZARM website in written form. So we'll just go through, pick the ones that have been upvoted the most, but feel free to just say or not whether those should be better in written or whether you can cover them off now. For those of you on the call, please, keep putting questions in. As I say, they will be covered, so really useful information, and it might even guide us if NZARM was to work with MFE a bit more on sort of if we want to narrow down on a couple of topics, we might be able to do that together as well. Yeah, I think that would be really good. So I'll just skim to the top then of the most common questions or most upvoted questions. First one, actually, you might have answered a little bit already in part. But the major question here is, what happens if a farm cannot mitigate the impact on freshwater to stop further degradation? Excuse me.
Right. Yeah. Oh, sorry. I'm just trying to. Oh, here we go. I couldn't find which was the most upvoted. So what happens? Freshwater stop further degradation. Well, I think you're always going to have some residual risks from your farming operation. So you're not going to be able to fully mitigate every single risk on your farm. There will always be some residual risks. And I know that's not a very good answer, but if you've got some major risks which you cannot mitigate due to your farming practices, then yeah, it's a really tough question. But you'd have to probably look at what your farming activities are on that property and whether or not that particular parcel of land is or that particular area is suited for that activity, or if you've got another area on the farm, you could do those particular activities to give it as simple as answer as possible. That's not, that could be one we could answer in writing, but that's a really tough question. Yeah.
Michael and Pippa, is that something that might get covered as part of the case study work you're doing or other guidance? It's a very good question.
Yeah, so I think I'll just add to that a little bit, Mike, as well. I think it's also important to remember that freshwater farm plans don't exist on their own in this space. So they are part of a wider regulatory framework for freshwater. So farmers are still required to meet all of the other regulatory requirements relating to freshwater and to have a freshwater farm plan. And that will also, as regional plans are developed and come live in regions, that will also relate to those things as well. So it's not just about kind of saying, oh, there's nothing that can be done to mitigate this impact or this risk. I think if it's a fairly significant risk, there are likely going to be other regulatory factors at play. And I think it's important to note that part of the certification process is ensuring that the risks are assessed and adequately identified so that the farmer they've identified the risk as it exists related to their farm landscape and the local catchment, that they've thought about the significance of the risk and that they've chosen an action that is appropriate to manage that risk. So I guess that is the first port of call, that a farmer would be supported through that process to choose appropriate actions. And if they are not able to, then it would be very hard for a certifier to certify that plan, basically. So I think that might also go some way in answering that next question down the list there.
The next question I've got on the most upvotes is around the catchment condition. Context.
Another one's just jumped up.
Yeah. So, sorry, I'm with you. Mitigating risk. That one. Do you want to cover that?
Yes. Yeah. The mitigating risk is not an absolute.
Yeah.
So yeah. Again, Sean, thanks for that question. Some of this is defined more in the guidance products around the process that a farmer should work through to identify the risk and to choose actions that are appropriate to manage that risk. And again, it's about considering that full picture of the catchment and the inherent on-farm risks and the farming activity as well.
Great, thank you, Pippa.
Yeah. All right.
Are you happy to jump to that CCVC or triple CV now? It is, isn't it?
Yeah. Which
so just if there's anyone just on their phones, I'll read it out. What timeline for CCVC to be defined? Seems councils are being rushed to identify this with iwi engaged, which is a really good point, and surely can't do freshwater farm plans without this catchment context or values nailed first. Thanks for the question.
Do you want me to answer that one, Pippa, or do you want to do that?
Well, I can have a crack and then I'll pass over to you if I miss anything. But yeah, so we have already been doing a lot of work with our first phase 1 regions around the requirements for the catchment context information. So that work has been happening in the background. They're not just starting that now. So yes, they do need to have catchment context information available for farmers at the time that freshwater farm plans switch on in that region or area. So I think also, I did talk a little bit about this earlier, that we expect that catchment context will develop over time as more information becomes more readily available, and part of that will be through the regional plan process. And yes, iwi do need to be engaged in that process, but we hope that that would happen through pre-existing relationships, and that the catchment context information is just sort of another part of the regional plan process and all that other work that is happening in the background with councils at the moment. So I think, Mike, have I missed anything there?
No, I think you covered that pretty well. But as you said, that for some people with their first freshwater farm plan in some regions, the catchment context may be a little bit light, the council, but as you've already mentioned, that will be picked up in the next full recertification as the councils develop that through their planning processes.
Right, thank you, guys.
Evolving thing, yeah.
That was really nicely answered. Thank you. Right here, the next one is, what is your view on freshwater farm plan if a farm is sold? Is the purchaser also buying the obligation promises made by the vendor?
So I think we sort of covered that off onto the partial recertification, that if you've got a new farm operator moving onto the property and they don't want to take on that freshwater farm plan that's already in there for the farm, that they could opt to have the recertification within 12 months of taking them on that property.
Thank you, Michael. Cool. Next one. Have you balanced the fact that the regulatory requirements of the audit process could result in the watering down of FEPs? That is, voluntary work may not be included on the risk that is not completed in time due to financial constraints or otherwise, and therefore result in non-compliance. This could mean farm plans become much less ambitious and therefore result in adverse outcomes for freshwater.
I can kick off with that one, Mike, and you can jump in at the end again. Thanks, Angus, for your question. So yes, you're right in that this is a balancing act. So basically, the system does require that audit process, and that is to ensure that the freshwater farm plans are being implemented as they were certified. So I think it is fair to say that there is some risk there that voluntary work won't be included. I think, again, it's important to think about freshwater farm plans as a cycle of continuous improvement. So we would probably expect that actions that are chosen, for example, in the first cycle of a freshwater farm plan, when you're selecting those actions, you're considering how best can I manage that risk on farm, and you're also weighing up what is fair and reasonable. You're thinking about the significance of the risk. So you choose the most fit for purpose action for that 5-year cycle. And that part of that is considering financial constraints. Once that is complete, you would then look to the next step for your next certification cycle. So the intention is that that improvement will still happen over time. And yeah, that perhaps the long-term goals are still there, even if they aren't specifically written into their action plan, because they're not going to be addressed in that immediate 5-year cycle, if that makes sense.
Thank you very much. And is there guidance on that one as well? Michael,
yes, that is addressed in guidance, I think in the developing a freshwater farm plan guidance.
Yep. Awesome. So thank you. There's probably, I'm sorry everyone, there's a heap of questions. We've probably only got enough time for one more, which live. They're jumping around a little bit. But this is the forestry one. And then just to reiterate, these will get answered. So please keep asking questions as this one's being answered, if you really have something. And if you've thought of it, other people probably have too. So better to put it in there if you can. So one that I wondered about as well, which is why is forestry and tree-related land uses not included in areas of risk within the legislation? And also native vegetation landscapes. And the point being that they also erode, can erode badly if poorly managed, particularly with pest animals like wallabies. Put you on the spot for the last question.
Do you want to ask that, Pippa, or should we put that one in writing?
Yeah, I think perhaps that's one in writing, because that is probably not the area of expertise of Michael myself. So we don't want to give an answer that's not accurate.
There's a real quick one then. Sorry, Michael, go ahead.
Oh, can I just say that one about certifier developing and certifying? Can I just answer that one? Because that's a really important one I didn't cover. So a person can develop and certify a freshwater farm plan, but they can't audit that same plan. So you could develop and certify a freshwater farm plan and get someone else to audit it, but you can't do it all through yourself. Yeah.
Well, thanks for that clarification. There's a real quick one here as well, was when will certification training start? Can you answer that one at all, or is that still coming?
We don't have a set date for that as yet, but that will be updated in writing as soon as we know.
Yeah, but it's not that far away.
Thank you very much. Look, I have to bring it to a close just in the interest of time. I'm sure we could spend the rest of the day answering those questions. Thank you for everyone on the call for the really good questions as well. Massive thanks to Ministry for the Environment, Michael and Pippa, for coming on and being very engaging and talking informative. What we'll hope to do with MFE is do more of these if you're open to it. And maybe we can look at some of these questions and pull some things apart if possible. So watch the space, but yeah, I'll just bring it to a close with a cut of care if that's okay. But again, thank you and go well. Kia mutu mātou mahi, mō tēnei wā, manakitia mai mātou katoa, o mātou hawa, o mātou whānau, ao ki te ao rangi. Ngā mihi, go well everybody. Thank you. Ka kite.